Welcome to this session, Dyslexia Initiatives in Topeka Public Schools, Session 2 for elementary teachers. I'm Robin Dixon, and I will be walking you through this session. Let's begin by looking at our learning intentions and success criteria for this session. Our learning intentions are as follows. We are learning to understand the screener selected by Topeka Public Schools. We are learning the subtests within the selected screeners and their given purposes, how screening will be accomplished, and we will know we are successful when we can identify the screener as DIBELS 8th edition, identify the components within the DIBELS assessment, and explain how testing will be accomplished across the district. In just a moment, you are going to pause the video and reflect on the learning from your first session. On the next slide, we're going to read the definition of dyslexia, and then we're going to think about what new words, ideas, and phrases are new to you or resonate with you. So as we're reviewing the definition, think about that new learning and jot it down. On the screen, you will see the Kansas definition of dyslexia that's also been identified as the definition of dyslexia by the International Dyslexia Association. And the definition is as follows. A specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So take a moment to pause the video, jot, and reflect. What were some key takeaways for you or some reminders that you may not have remembered the first time you read this definition? So pause the video, reflect on the definition, and when you are ready, proceed to the next slide. We're now going to take a moment to review what dyslexia is not. Dyslexia is not a hearing or vision issue. It is not seeing letters or words backwards. Dyslexia is also not attributable to limited intelligence. In fact, the opposite is true. Often those who show characteristics of dyslexia are often highly intelligent. It is not due to low motivation or limited effort. In fact, we often see the opposite. There is extremely high motivation and extremely high effort in order to learn to read. It is not due to poor teaching. It is not rare. In fact, 1 of 5 students comes to the classroom with some level of dyslexia. It is also not a condition that can be outgrown. As seen in our definition, it's neurobiological. It cannot be outgrown. We're going to explore some of the characteristics that you might see of a student who may be struggling with reading and may show characteristics of dyslexia. So we will begin by looking at a pre-reader. A pre-reader is a student who is simply not yet reading. They're learning all of the skills that will be necessary to become a reader. Here's what a pre-reader may struggle with. He or she may struggle with retaining alphabetic writing instruction. That student may also struggle with alphabetic knowledge of letters and sounds. The student may not make progress in phonemic awareness instruction. Phonemic awareness instruction simply meaning the instruction in the letters and the sounds and how do we manipulate sounds, blend sounds together, for example, to make words. You will also see a lack of progress in phonics instruction. And you'll also see that a student who is a pre-reader may struggle connecting letters and sounds. So a student who is struggling with this may struggle to know that the T makes the T sound, or that the R makes the sound. So knowing the letter and the sound are going to be a struggle. When we move to students who are readers, here are some red flags that you might see with students who are reading. A reader may struggle with decoding words. This simply means when a student comes to a word he or she does not know, can they sound it out? If they're struggling, the answer is no. They cannot decode the word characteristic, for example, or the word struggle to tell you what that word is. This reader may also struggle with reading accurately and fluently. They're struggling with accuracy because they're not decoding, and so when they come to an unknown word, they're mispronouncing it or substituting another word that may or may not make sense. And we know this in fact impacts fluency. Fluency is the ability to read with prosody, to be able to read with expression, to read the words accurately as well. So you'll see a struggle with those two areas. Also, the student will struggle with spelling words that have been taught or learned. They'll struggle with misspelling the word they, for example, in multiple times or over and over. Or you've been working with words that have a certain spelling pattern or a prefix that's common. They struggle to remember how to spell those words. We know that spelling is the encoding of the decoding process. So a reader that struggles with decoding, it's very common to struggle with spelling as well. They may struggle to express their thoughts in writing. This might be a student who, when they look at a paper, they have great ideas that they're sharing with you verbally, but when it comes to the writing process, it's very difficult, and they have struggled getting those ideas on paper. Again, if you're struggling with spelling, it's really going to be hard to write a paper where you're spelling correctly with your ideas, because you're so focused on the spelling that your thoughts and ideas become secondary. A student who is showing characteristics of dyslexia may also have difficulty with comprehending things that they're reading. Again, all of that mental energy is being spent on decoding and sounding out the words, and comprehension becomes secondary. When we look at phonological processing deficits that may come into play with dyslexia, you may see delayed speech or early articulation errors. This means that maybe their vocabulary or their working vocabulary is not as large as we would expect for a given age, or maybe they're developing their speech at a slower rate. And early articulation errors, saying the words incorrectly. For example, the word spaghetti, you would say paschetti. That's an articulation error. Confusion of similar sounds. If we look at B and P, those make the B and P sound. You'll notice that those are very close, so you'll see a struggle in delineating those sounds. V and F, you hear F and V. Those are very similar, and you make them similarly when you're speaking, and so you'll see confusion of those kinds of similar sounding letters and sounds. Poor rhyming skills, hat and bat, cat and sat, knowing that those words all rhyme. So you'll see difficulties with rhyming. Also, the inability to master segmenting sounds. Then segmenting sounds just means knowing that the word bat has 3 sounds. B, a, t. So the ability to not break that down into its 3 individual sounds or phonemes. And also difficulty identifying initial, medial, and final sounds in words. In our example just a moment ago of the word bat, the initial sound is b, the medial sound is a, and the final sound is t. So knowing the placement of those sounds within its position within the word will be difficult for students who have phonological processing deficits. Here are some characteristics of dyslexia within the orthographic processing part of our brain. In this case, you'll see a difficulty in copying from the board or from a book. This means that if you're taking notes from the board, this student may have great difficulty seeing the information on the board, looking down at his or her paper, and copying that information, or having a book right next to a sheet of paper and being able to copy ideas down. Orthographic, that's our writing piece. Difficulty learning how to make letter forms, so struggling to make a G or an F. Very difficult to make the forms of those letters. Difficulty remembering high frequency words. For example, the word the, that's a high frequency word. A student who is struggling to remember that word, for example, or similar words with high frequency words, shows a concern in the orthographic processing. Confusion of similar looking letters and words. For example, hot and top look very similar. They both have the O in the middle, different medial or different beginning and ending sounds. Hawk and talk, we're only changing the first letter. So confusing those similar words and letters. Having difficulty mastering the rules of spelling. So for example, when do you double a consonant? When you add ing or ed. Dropping the y when you're and changing it to I and adding es for a plural. Those are rules of English spelling. Other characteristics of dyslexia include struggles with automaticity and fluency. Students who struggle with automaticity and fluency have difficulty sustaining attention to the process of naming letters and sounds and blending those together to make a word. They are spending all of their cognitive energy sounding out each individual sound and determining the sound's not only name, but also the sound that letter represents. Students may have difficulty retrieving verbal labels. So looking at a pen and determining that that is the word pen, you may see them struggle with seeing an object and naming it, or seeing a phone and being able to identify it as a phone. Students may struggle articulating words rapidly. So the use of flashcards, giving and going through flashcards, students may struggle to see the word on the flashcard and name it quickly and effectively. Now that we've looked at the characteristics of dyslexia, let's take a moment to pause the video and process how dyslexia manifests itself in readers and pre-readers. What do these characteristics look like in the classroom and at the grade level that you teach? What experiences have you had with students who exhibit some of these difficulties? And what did you do to help that student, and how did you proceed? So take a moment to pause the video, reflect on these questions, and when you're ready, start the video and proceed to the next slide. We're now going to turn our attention to data collection. Data collection involves using universal screener and progress monitoring. And a universal screener should be quick and easy to administer. This means that it's easy for students to take and it's easy for teachers and support staff to administer. It's also not a test that is lengthy and drawn out. It is given to all students. The same screener would be given to all first graders, for example, or all second graders. It is also reliable, and this simply means that the assessment will produce similar scores on repeated attempts within an abbreviated time frame. So if you give the student the same similar type of assessment, you would get the same results. You shouldn't see a large variance in the results. And Is the test valid? Valid measurements accurately measure what it's intended to measure. So if I'm measuring the ability to segment sounds in a word, is that what I'm really measuring? Or if I'm identifying a letter, names, and sounds, am I really assessing that? And is it giving me information on student knowledge of letter sounds and names? When we look at data collection in universal screeners and progress monitoring, we also know that general education teachers are involved participants. They will possess copies of progress monitoring information. They will know skills instructed with their students in Tier 2 and Tier 3 settings. So classroom teachers will know what the interventions are that students are receiving from reading interventionists or special education teachers, for example, or from other providers within the building. Any decision that is made regarding a student's academic progress are data-driven. Decisions are data-based by a collective team. They are reviewed and validated universal screening data. So are we using that screener data to make decisions on who needs to be progress monitored on a specific skill or set of skills? That data needs to be analyzed and monitored. Are students making progress or are they not? How is that data being used to group students? Are students being grouped according to areas needed for improvement, or are they being enriched based on what the data shows? Are we using that data to determine instruction? The data is also meant to help us know where we need to fill in gaps for our students and where are students needing additional instruction, or where can students be enriched. That should drive our instruction. Are we progress monitoring if we put an intervention in place in the classroom? Are we monitoring the success of that intervention for the student? Are interventions being documented? Is this being documented, for example, in a GEI plan? And our universal screener that Topeka Public Schools has chosen is Dibble's 8th edition. And Dibble's 8th edition stands for Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. And this will be the universal screener that we will be using in the Topeka Public Schools. Why Dibble's, you might ask? Well, Dibble's meets all of our state requirements for screening. It's quick and easy to administer. There are also embedded multiple forms for progress monitoring. A reliable test, meaning we are going to get the same results over the course of time. And it is also valid, meaning the subtests are designed to test the exact skills that we are needing to assess. On the screen, you will see the subtests that are given at your grade level or grade levels. And as we walk through these slides, please note the subtests that are given to your students. In kindergarten, students will complete letter naming fluency, fall, winter, and spring. They will complete nonsense word fluency in the spring. They will complete word reading fluency, fall, winter, and spring, and phoneme segmentation in the winter and spring. First grade will complete phoneme segmentation fluency, fall, winter, and spring. Nonsense word fluency, fall, winter, and spring. Word reading fluency, fall, winter, and spring. And oral reading fluency, winter and spring. Notice in second grade there are less subtests that are administered, and we see nonsense word fluency in the fall only. Word reading fluency, fall, winter, and spring, and oral reading fluency, fall, winter, and spring. In grades K through third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade, students will only complete the oral reading fluency as the required dyslexia screener. In middle school, in grades 6, 7, and 8, students also only complete the oral reading fluency. And in 9th through 12th grade, it is oral reading fluency with a comprehension measure in the fall. The first subtest on the DIBELS 8th edition is the letter naming fluency. And the purpose of this assessment is to assess student mastery of alphabetic principle. Students are presented with upper and lower case letters that have been randomly arranged in order. So they are not in alphabetical order, but they are randomly ordered. And in 1 minute, students are asked to name as many upper and lower cases as they can. And this is a 1 minute test to produce as many correct upper and lower case letter names as the student can. What happens in this test is the examiner says, here are some letters. Tell me the names of as many letters as you can. When I say begin, start here and go across the page. Point to each letter and tell me the name of that letter. If you come to a letter that you don't know, I'll tell it to you. Put your finger on the first letter. Ready? Begin. And the student has 1 minute to name as many upper and lower cases as possible. If a student hesitates, the examiner waits 3 seconds, names the letter, points to the next letter, and says keep going, and that is marked as an incorrect answer. If a student says the letter sound, the examiner will say to the student, tell me the letter's name, not its sound. And the examiner will discontinue the test if the student does not correctly name any letters in the first line of the assessment. The next test on the DIBELS 8th edition is called the Phoneme Segmentation Fluency Test, or PSF for short. And this assessment measures a student's ability to segment 3 and 4 phoneme words into their individual phonemes fluently. And a phoneme, remember, is what we call a sound. And the PSF measure has been found to be an excellent predictor of later reading achievement. And this task is administered by the administrator orally. And students are listening to words of 3 to 4 phonemes. The student then verbally produces the individual phonemes or sounds in the word. If the examiner says sat, the student should say s-at. And he or she receives 3 out of 3 possible points for that word. If a student only responds with s and t, he or she would only receive 2 of 3 points on that item. Please remember that this subtest is verbal. There is not a form that students will read from. The examiner says, I am going to say a word. After I say it, you tell me the sound in the word. So if I say am, you would say Let's try one. And then you give the student the 2 phoneme word of it to practice with. Again, this is a 1 minute test. If a student hesitates, the examiner will wait 3 seconds, give the next word, and score the word as incorrect. The examiner will discontinue the test if a student does not correctly name any sounds in the first 5 words. The administrator will also not give the nonsense word fluency and word reading fluency subtests if this occurs. The next subtest is the Nonsense Word Fluency Test, or NWF for short. And in this assessment, students are reading and being able to decode individual phonemes and blend the sounds together to read a word. The student is presented VC, which are vowel consonant words, and CVC words, which are consonant vowel consonant nonsense words, and then students are asked to verbally produce the individual sounds in each word. For example, the examiner says the word POV, which is a nonsense word. The student could respond with the 3 individual phonemes of p, v, or he or she may say the word POV, and in either scenario, the student would receive a 3 out of 3 for that word. If the student only correctly identifies 2 phonemes, it would be a score of 2 out of 3. And the student is once again allotted 1 minute to produce as many letter sounds as he or she can. The examiner then gives the student the final score of the correct number of letter sounds produced in 1 minute. The examiner will put the words in front of the student and say, look at this word. It is a make-believe word. Watch me read the word. Hap. I can say the letters ap, or I can read the whole word hap. It's your turn to read a make-believe word. The examiner will do a practice word with the student. And then after that sample, the examiner will say, here are some more make-believe words. Start here and go across the page. When I say begin, read the words the best that you can. This is also a 1 minute test. If a student hesitates, wait 3 seconds, point to the next letter or word and say keep going, and mark the missed words or sounds as incorrect. This test will be discontinued by the examiner if a student does not get any of the sounds correct in the first five words, and the examiner will discontinue the nonsense word fluency subtest. The next subtest within the Dibbles 8th edition is Word Reading Fluency, or WRF for short. And in this assessment, students were going to read from a sheet that has a list of words. And each test will include up to 140 words presented in rows with 5 words per row. And the student simply reads for 1 minute and reads the words as they are listed. This helps to determine if the student has accurate and rapid word recognition. And the student's score is the number of correct words read in 1 minute. The examiner will say, please read from this list of words and go across the page. When I say begin, point to each word and read it the best you can. If you get stuck, I will tell you the word so you can keep reading. Put your finger on the first word. Ready? Begin. Again, this is a 1 minute subtest. And if a student hesitates, you're going to wait 3 seconds and then give the correct word, point to the next word, and say keep going. The examiner will discontinue the test if the student does not name any of the words in the first line. And the final subtest within the Dibbles 8th edition is the Oral Reading Fluency, or ORF for short. And in this subtest, the student will read for 1 minute. He or she will read a passage that is with connected text. And if students omit words, substitute words, and a hesitation of 3 seconds are scored as errors. If the student self-corrects the word within 3 seconds, it is scored as accurate. And the student score is simply the number of words read correctly in 1 minute. So for example, a student reads 50 words. 50 is his or her score. Or a student reads 47 words. 47 would be his or her ORF reading score. In this test, the examiner gives the student the connected text passage and says, please read from this form. If you get stuck, I will tell you the word so you can keep reading. When I say stop, I may ask you to tell me about what you read, so do your best. Ready? Begin. And the student will complete a 1 minute reading while the examiner is marking the errors and also tracking the words read correctly. Now that we've examined the subtests within the Dibbles 8th edition Universal Screener, how will this be accomplished during the 2021-2022 school year? Administration will be done at the building level. Testing teams may include reading interventionists, math interventionists, instructional coaches, and any other staff that the building team has determined will be part of the building testing team. Please note that classroom teachers will not be administering the assessment. And when will this occur? This universal screening will occur 3 times a year: fall, winter, and spring. After the universal screener has been given, there may be students that need to be progress monitored as they are not showing proficiency within the DIBELS 8th edition screener tests that have been chosen for each grade level at the state level. So who will be progress monitored? This will need to be a school-based decision. Will it be the classroom teachers who are progress monitoring, or will it be another specialist within the building? When will this occur? Well, if a student is in the GEI process, progress monitoring must happen weekly. And what will be used to progress monitor? Within the DIBELS 8th edition, there are progress monitoring assessments which are already built in, and what's important to note on these progress monitoring tests is that they can be delivered off grade level as well as on grade level. As we come to the end of this presentation, let's take a moment to revisit our learning intentions and our success criteria and determine if our outcomes were met for this session. In this session, we were learning the screener selected by the Topeka Public Schools. We were also learning the subtests within the selected screener and their given purpose. We also learned how screening will be accomplished within the Topeka Public Schools. And are we successful? Are we able to identify the screener as DIBELS 8th edition? Are we able to identify the components within the DIBELS 8th edition, meaning the various subtests that are come within DIBELS 8th edition? And can you explain how testing will be accomplished across the district? I'm Robin Dixon, and it has been my pleasure to present to you Session 2 on the dyslexia initiatives within the Topeka Public Schools.